When someone breaks your heart, the world tells you to get even, to make them miss you, to show them what they lost. But the truth is, the most powerful revenge isn't loud, dramatic, or messy. It's silent. It's choosing yourself so completely that the person who once shook your world no longer even has a place in it. Acting like he never existed isn't about pretending. It's about rising. It's about reclaiming your peace, rebuilding your confidence, and realizing that his absence doesn't hurt you anymore, it frees you. The moment you decide to act like he never existed, you take back every ounce of power you once handed over. Not because you want to punish him, but because you're finally ready to honor yourself. The first step in that is letting go of the idea that closure, apologies, or explanations will heal you. Waiting for someone who already showed you their lack of effort is just another way of staying emotionally tied to the pain they caused. And if he didn't respect you when he had you, he's not going to magically give you the perfect closure now. That's why disappearing from his emotional story is your liberation. You stop trying to understand him and start focusing on understanding yourself. It begins quietly. You stop replaying the conversations, the messages, the moments that once felt like everything. You stop trying to decode what went wrong or rewriting history to make his behavior seem more acceptable. Acting like he never existed means you no longer romanticize the bare minimum he gave. You stop letting nostalgia distort reality. Instead, you see him not as the person you wished he was, but as the person he truly showed himself to be, someone who didn't choose you, didn't value you, or didn't show up for you consistently. And when you see that clearly, you can finally release the version of him your heart created. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a muscle you build. At first, your mind may still drift to him out of habit, not desire. But each time you pull your focus back to yourself, you weaken the emotional grip he once held. Acting like he never existed is not suppression, it's redirection. It's choosing not to let a memory interrupt your growth. It's allowing your mind to detox from the addiction to what you once thought was love. As you distance yourself mentally, you also detach emotionally from the validation you once sought from him. When someone hurts you, your ego wants them to come back, to admit they were wrong, to finally see your worth. But your heart wants something different. It wants peace. So you stop waiting for him to notice you're gone. You stop hoping he feels your absence. The revenge is not in him realizing anything. It's in you not caring whether he does. When you act like he never existed, you reclaim the energy you used to invest in wondering what he's doing, who he's talking to, or whether he regrets losing you. You free yourself from the exhausting cycle of comparison, overthinking, and emotional bargaining. You unhook yourself from the fantasy that one person determined your value. Because deep down, you start to understand something powerful. His inability to love you is not a reflection of your worth, only a reflection of his limitations. Your revenge becomes your rebirth. You start creating a life so full, so rich, and so aligned that the past becomes a distant blur. You return to your goals, your friendships, your passions. You reconnect with the parts of you that dimmed while you tried to make the relationship work. And as you build this fuller life, the version of you who cried over him becomes harder and harder to recognize. By the time he realizes what he lost, if he ever does, you've already outgrown the person who needed him. You've become someone he wouldn't even know how to approach anymore, not because you've changed for him, but because you finally changed for yourself. Acting like he never existed isn't cold, it's self-respect. It's choosing peace over chaos, healing over longing, and your future over your past. Respecting your peace means choosing the version of you that isn't constantly waiting, wondering, or hurting. The second keynote is about reclaiming emotional authority, taking back the space in your mind where he used to live rent-free. When you act like he never existed, you're not pretending he wasn't part of your story. You're simply refusing to let him continue shaping how you feel, how you think, and how you value yourself. This is the moment you stop giving him emotional access. You stop giving him the privilege of influencing your mood or your day. Instead, you decide that your peace will no longer be negotiable. This process begins with paying attention to what drains you. Every time you revisit old messages, replay old conversations, or wonder what he's doing, you hand over a tiny piece of your peace. It doesn't feel dramatic, but it adds up. Emotional peace isn't destroyed in a single moment, it's chipped away little by little. When you protect that peace, you start recognizing which thoughts are habits and which thoughts are choices. Your mind may naturally drift toward him, but you no longer entertain those thoughts. You redirect. You choose yourself. You remind yourself that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing what and who you give your attention to now. Protecting your peace also means detaching from the outcomes you used to fantasize about. Maybe you imagined a future with him. Maybe you hoped he would change. Maybe you waited for the day he'd finally recognize your value. But peace doesn't come from clinging to potential. It comes from accepting reality. When someone shows you their patterns, when their actions consistently undermine your worth, you don't find peace by negotiating with it. You find peace by stepping away from it, by acknowledging that love shouldn't feel like waiting to be chosen. That respect shouldn't be something you have to earn through suffering. A powerful part of protecting your peace is ending emotional negotiations. These are the silent bargains you make with yourself. Maybe if I had tried harder, maybe he will come back. Maybe he didn't mean it. These thoughts keep your heart in a loop, trapped between hope and disappointment. When you protect your peace, you stop arguing with reality. You stop rewriting the story to make him look better or the relationship look healthier. You accept that peace comes from truth, not fantasy. As you step into this new emotional space, you start setting boundaries internally first, then externally. A boundary is not a wall, it's a filter. It's saying, my energy is sacred, and not everyone gets access to it. It's unfollowing, muting, or blocking not out of spite, but out of self-care. It's refusing to engage in conversations that pull you backward. It's saying no to situations that disturb your emotional stability. When you protect your peace, your boundaries stop being reactions and start becoming priorities. What surprises most people is how empowering this shift feels. When you stop giving your emotional energy to someone who didn't value it, you suddenly have room to feel like yourself again. You sleep better, you breathe deeper, you stop carrying the weight of someone else's inconsistency. Your mind becomes quieter, your heart becomes lighter, and your life becomes more your own. You realize peace isn't something the world gives you. It's something you choose every day, especially when it's hard. Eventually, you reach a place where his memory feels neutral, not painful, not nostalgic, just irrelevant. And that's when you truly understand what it means to protect your peace. You've built a life where he no longer has influence, presence, or importance. Not because you erased him, but because you elevated yourself. Letting go of old stories is one of the most powerful things you can do when you're trying to move on from someone who didn't value you. The human mind is wired to create narratives that make emotional experiences feel meaningful, and when a relationship ends, especially one where you were taken for granted, you naturally cling to those stories because they once gave you comfort, hope, or direction. But those same stories can become the chains that keep you emotionally stuck. Acting like he never existed isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about releasing the version of the story that keeps you emotionally tied to him. One of the hardest stories to let go of is the what could have been. You invested in a future you imagined with him. You created memories in advance. You played out all the ways he might change, grow, or realize your worth. But now, holding on to that story only prolongs your attachment. It traps you in a narrative where you keep waiting for an ending that was never going to happen because he never showed up for the relationship in the way you showed up for him. Letting go means accepting that the fantasy was yours, but the lack of effort was his. Another story people struggle to release is the if-only story. If only you had communicated better. If only you hadn't been too emotional. If only you had walked away earlier. These thoughts are the mind's way of looking for control in a situation where you felt powerless. But you have to recognize that these stories are illusions. They don't serve your healing, they serve your guilt. Letting go of these mental loops means acknowledging that love isn't something you prevent by being perfect. It's something that either grows because both people are invested or dies because one person stops showing up. No amount of self-blame can rewrite that truth. You might also hold onto the story of who you thought he was. There's often a gap between the version of him you wanted to believe in and the actual person he showed himself to be. Maybe he was charming at the beginning, maybe he said the right words, maybe he had moments where he made you feel seen, appreciated, or special. And we often cling to those moments because they were real, just not reliable. Letting go means allowing yourself to see the full picture, not just the highlights. It means acknowledging that he may have been good in moments but not good for you overall. Letting go of old stories also involves releasing the identity you held in that relationship. You were the giver, the patient one, the forgiving one, the one who kept trying. When the relationship ends, you might feel lost because those roles gave you a sense of purpose. But those roles were tied to a chapter that's now closed. You're allowed to create a new identity, one that isn't defined by how much you endured, but by how deeply you grew. When you let go of the story, you give yourself permission to evolve. Lastly, letting go requires emotional honesty. It means allowing yourself to grieve not for him, but for the version of you who tried so hard. It means sitting with the truth instead of numbing it. It means admitting that the story you held onto was comforting but not accurate, hopeful but not realistic. And when you release it, something shifts inside you. You stop longing, you stop replaying, you stop rewriting. You start living. When you let go of the stories, you let go of the bond. And when the bond breaks, that's when you finally feel free enough to act like he never existed, not by erasing the past, but by no longer being defined by it. Silence is one of the most underestimated forms of power, especially after someone has taken you for granted. We often believe that closure comes from long conversations, emotional explanations, or trying to make the other person understand how deeply they hurt us. But the truth is, silence creates a kind of clarity that words can't. When you choose silence, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as self-respect, you communicate something far stronger than any speech ever could. You show that your peace is more important than proving a point, and that your dignity matters more than being heard by someone who never listened in the first place. Silence is powerful because it forces you to redirect energy inward instead of outward. When you're busy explaining yourself to someone who has already shown they don't value your emotions, you drain your own strength. You keep giving to a connection that no longer gives anything back. But when you go silent, you're no longer trying to convince him of your worth. You're affirming it to yourself. Silence says, I won't fight for a spot in someone's life if they didn't care to keep me there. It stops the emotional bleeding. It pulls your power back from his hands and places it back in your own. Another reason silence is transformative is because it removes the emotional reward he once got from your reactions. Whether it was your frustration, your worry, your hope, or your disappointment, Every emotional response kept him connected to you. People who take you for granted rely on your consistent presence. They rely on you answering the phone. They rely on you explaining yourself. They rely on you always being available, even when they aren't. But silence breaks that pattern instantly. It disconnects the emotional supply he took for granted. When you stop responding, there's nothing for him to feed on, no reassurance, no validation, no attention. Silence becomes a mirror, and he has no choice but to confront himself in it. At first, silence will feel uncomfortable. You might feel the urge to reach out, to check on him, to justify your distance. But that discomfort is actually the withdrawal from a bond that wasn't healthy. Staying silent allows you to detox from the emotional dependence that developed over time. It helps you break the habit of seeking validation from someone who is careless with your heart. Silence teaches discipline. It teaches patience. It teaches you to sit with your feelings instead of running back to someone who caused them. Silence is also the gateway to perspective. When you remove yourself from constant communication and emotional chaos, you start to see the relationship for what it truly was, not what you hoped it could be. Without his voice clouding your judgment, you can finally hear your own. You begin noticing the red flags you overlooked, the bare minimum you accepted, and the imbalances you normalized. Silence gives you the mental distance needed to see the truth clearly, and clarity is what allows you to heal. Most importantly, silence marks the beginning of a new story. It isn't passive, it's intentional, it's powerful. It's you stepping away from anything that disrespected, drained, or diminished you. When you stop explaining, defending, or proving yourself, you rise. When you stop giving someone access to your mind and emotions, you rebuild. When you choose silence, you choose self-respect. And that is the loudest message you will ever send. In the end, silence isn't about ignoring him, it's about honoring yourself. It's about choosing peace over chaos, dignity over drama, and growth over repetition. And when he eventually notices your silence, because he will, it won't be because you wanted him to. It will be because your absence speaks with a strength that your presence no longer needed to. Focusing on your future is one of the most liberating and empowering choices you can make when someone has taken you for granted for too long. It shifts your entire emotional landscape from looking backward to moving forward, from replaying what hurt you to creating what heals you. When you act like he never existed, you're not running from the past, you're reclaiming the present and designing a future that no longer includes the weight of his behavior. This kind of forward momentum is where confidence is rebuilt, identity is rediscovered, and peace becomes your new baseline. The reason focusing on your future is so transformational is because it redirects your mental and emotional energy away from him. For so long, he occupied space in your thoughts, what he meant, what he felt, why he acted the way he did, whether he would change. That kind of emotional investment keeps you stuck in the same chapter. But when you turn your attention toward the future, you stop asking questions about him and start asking better questions about yourself. What do I actually want now? What kind of partner do I deserve? What kind of life feels aligned with the woman I'm becoming? This shift in questioning is what moves you out of heartbreak and into personal evolution. Focusing on your future also means expanding your world again. When a relationship drains you, your life often becomes smaller. You say no to opportunities, you put dreams on hold, you shrink parts of yourself to keep the peace. Now is the time to reverse that. You grow your world by adding new experiences, new goals, new connections, and new hobbies. You start doing things he never encouraged, never cared about, or never bothered to understand. You step into spaces that remind you of your strength, your curiosity, and your individuality. The more you build forward momentum, the less room there is for old pain to sit in your life, Creating a future-focused mindset also means redefining your standards. Pain changes people, but conscious healing elevates them. When you reflect on what you tolerated, what you accepted, and what you forgave too easily, you begin to form new boundaries. Not walls, boundaries. You learn to spot patterns earlier. You stop over-investing too soon. You value consistency more than charm. You prioritize emotional safety over emotional excitement. These new standards shape your future relationships, not by making you guarded, but by making you wiser and more self-secure. Another powerful part of focusing on your future is embracing reinvention. You get to choose which parts of yourself you're taking with you and which parts you're leaving behind. Maybe this breakup pushes you to upgrade yourself, care, your habits, your friendships, your environment, or even your career. Pain often becomes the catalyst that wakes you up to how much potential you've been suppressing. When you start embracing growth, the version of you that tolerated being taken for granted begins to fade. In her place rises someone more grounded, more discerning, and more confident. That is the version of you that your future needs. People often underestimate how much emotional space opens up when you stop giving energy to someone who didn't appreciate it. Your mind becomes clearer, your heart becomes lighter, and your goals start taking shape again. You begin to notice things you were too distracted to see: opportunities, inspiration, new connections, and parts of yourself that were hidden under the weight of that relationship. Your future becomes a blank canvas, and instead of filling it with memories of him, you fill it with your ambitions, your healing, and your rebirth. And here's the irony: when you focus fully on your future, that is when he becomes irrelevant. Not because you forced yourself to forget him, but because your life becomes too meaningful for his memory to matter. When you build a future that inspires you, his absence stops being painful and starts being freeing. You become someone he no longer has access to, someone he can't reach, someone he no longer recognizes, because you grew in ways he never pushed you to. Ultimately, focusing on your future is the most beautiful revenge, not because it hurts him, but because it heals you. It's the moment you rise, move forward, and step into the life you were always meant to live without him weighing you down. The sixth keynote is about reclaiming your identity, the version of you that existed before he dimmed your light, questioned your worth, or made you forget how powerful you truly are. When someone takes you for granted, they don't just neglect your emotions, they slowly erode your sense of self. You start molding yourself to fit their inconsistencies. You start lowering your expectations to avoid disappointment. You shrink parts of who you are just to maintain the connection. Reclaiming your identity means reversing every one of those quiet compromises. It means returning to yourself with more strength, more clarity, and more confidence than you had before he ever entered your life. The first step in reclaiming your identity is remembering who you were before the relationship drained you. Think about the woman who had dreams that weren't filtered through someone else's opinions. The woman who had a voice that didn't shake. The woman who set boundaries without apologizing. The woman who didn't question her enoughness. Heartbreak often makes you feel like you lost pieces of yourself, but the truth is, those pieces aren't gone. They're just buried under the weight of emotional disappointment. Reclaiming your identity is about digging them out again and letting them rise back to the surface. A powerful part of this process is reconnecting with your values. Maybe you value loyalty, kindness, honesty, consistency. Maybe you value independence, ambition, growth, and communication. When he took you for granted, you likely compromised some of those values just to maintain peace. You stayed silent when you should have spoken. You tolerated behavior you would have once walked away from. You lowered your standards because you hoped he would rise to meet them. Reclaiming your identity means returning to your non-negotiables, and refusing to abandon them ever again. It means choosing alignment over attachment. Rediscovering who you are also involves rebuilding your confidence. Confidence doesn't magically appear. It grows from keeping promises to yourself. Every time you walk away from something harmful, you gain a piece of confidence. Every time you respect your own boundaries, you build more. Every time you choose yourself over someone who treated you carelessly, you strengthen your self-worth. Confidence isn't about feeling perfect, it's about knowing your value, even when someone else didn't recognize it. It's about trusting your intuition again instead of silencing it for the sake of someone else's comfort. Reclaiming your identity means allowing yourself to expand again. When you were with him, your world may have felt small, centered around his moods, his attention, his inconsistency, his validation. Now, you get to widen that world. You get to pursue passions you ignored, friendships you neglected, ideas you postponed, hobbies you didn't have time for. You get to try new things, meet new people, and step into environments that reflect who you're becoming. Expansion is a form of healing. The more you grow, the less room there is for old wounds to control you. Another essential part of reclaiming your identity is re-establishing emotional independence. You don't need his approval anymore. You don't need his apology to move forward. You don't need closure to heal. You don't need him to acknowledge your worth. You acknowledge it yourself. This emotional independence is what makes you untouchable. It separates you from the version of yourself who kept waiting for him to do right by you. When you stop depending on someone who disappointed you, you take full ownership of your power again, and eventually you reach a point where you feel like yourself again, except stronger, wiser, and more grounded. He no longer shapes your mood, your choices, or your identity. He no longer has a place in your narrative because you've rewritten the story without him. Not out of bitterness, but out of evolution. Reclaiming your identity is the ultimate act of emotional freedom. It's you standing in your truth, owning your worth, and rising into a version of yourself that was always meant to exist, one he was never capable of handling. True power isn't in making him regret losing you. It's in choosing yourself. When you act like he never existed, you stop giving him space in your mind, your heart, and your life. You reclaim your peace, rebuild your confidence, and rise into the person you were always meant to be. That is the ultimate revenge, living fully, thriving unapologetically, and proving to yourself that your happiness doesn't depend on anyone who didn't value it.